Chapter 32. Humble in our arrogance. The morning was icy but windless on the day of winter conclave, January 7th, year of the Raptor. It was a natural chill. The Thunderhead did not finish weather systems for sites. There were times that sites would complain about inconvenient weather and insist it was the Thunderhead's spite, which was ridiculous, but some people could not help but ascribe human failings to it. The Blade Guard had a much larger presence than usual at Winter Conclave. Its primary purpose had always been to police the crowds and make sure the sites had a clear path up the stone steps to the State House. This time, however, the stairs were flanked by a full gauntlet of guards, shoulder to shoulder, behind which the disappointed crowd could barely glimpse the sights as they passed. Some people forced their way through to take a picture or dare to touch a sides rope. In the past, these over-enthusiastic citizens were pulled back and returned to the crowd with a glare or a reprimand. Today, the guards were instructed to dispatch them by bullet. It took only a few dead people being rushed to revival centers for the rest to get the message. Thus, order was maintained. As with everything else, the sites had polarized feelings about the added security measures. "I don't like it," grumbled Scythe Sulk. "Shouldn't these good people have at the very least the opportunity to see us in our glory and not just holding the blade that cleans them?" Scythe Brahms offered a counterpoint to the sentiment. "I applaud our High Blade wisdom in providing better security," he proclaimed. "Our safety is paramount." Scythe O'Keefe commented that they should just build a tunnel and bring the sites in underground, and although she meant it to be bitterly facetious, Scythe Carnegie noted it was the first good idea O'Keefe had had in years. Dissent fomented, and hackles were raised even before the sites entered the building. "Once Site Lucifer is taken down, all this will settle, and things will return to the way they've always been," more than one of the sites said, as if taking down the Black Robe Vigilante was a cure-all. The Scythe in turquoise tried to stand as proud as Scythe Curie as she climbed the steps, doing her best to dismiss Scythe Retronova from the day, allowing herself to be Scythe Anesthesia, both inside and out. She heard the grumbles about Scythe Lucifer as they climbed the stairs, but was heartened rather than troubled by them. Not only was Rowan still out there, but they were actually calling him Scythe Lucifer, accepting him as one of their own, even if it was unintentional. "Do they actually believe that stopping Rowan will solve everything that's wrong with the Scythedom?" she asked Scythe Curie. "Some choose not to see anything wrong," Marie responded. Anastasia found that hard to believe, but on the other hand, finding easy scapegoats for complicated problems had been a human pastime since the first mob of cavemen struck someone down with a rock. The uneasy truth was that the division in the Scythedom was as deep as a cleaning wand. There was the New Order, with platitudes to justify its sadistic appetites, and the Old Guard, which blustered about how things were supposed to be, but was unable to take action to do anything about it. The two factions were locked in a death grip now, but neither could die. As always, there was a lavish spread of donated breakfast food in the rotunda, where the sites gathered informally before conclave began. Today's morning feast was a seafood buffet, designed with staggering artistic skill. Slabs of smoked salmon and kippered currying, vessels of shrimp and oysters on ice, artisan breads and countless varieties of cheese. Anastasia thought she had no appetite, but seeing such a spread could entice the dead to rise for one last meal. Still, she hesitated at first to partake, because it felt like defacing a sculptor, but the rest of the sites, the good and the bad, attacked it like piranha. So Anastasia gave in and did the same. "It is an unofficial right that dates back to the old days," Scythe Curie once told her, "when the most austere and reserved of sites would, just thrice a year, give in to gluttony without regret." Marie drew Anastasia's attention to the groups of sites and how they huddled in social cliques. Nowhere was the division clearer than here in the rotunda. The New Order sites gave forth a vibe that was palpable, filled with a brazen egotism that was markedly different from the more subdued self-importance of the rest of the Scythedom. "We're all arrogant," Marit had once told her. After all, we are chosen because we are the brightest and the wisest. The best we can hope for is to be humbled in our arrogance. As Anastasia took in the crowd, it chilled her to see how many sides had altered their robes to include embedded jewels, which, thanks to Goddard, their martyr, had become a symbol of the New Order. When Saita first came to Conclave as an apprentice, there were far more independent sides who did not align themselves with either faction, but it seemed there were fewer and fewer, as the line in the sand became a fissure that threatened to swallow those who did not choose a side. She was horrified to find that honorable side Nero had added amethyst gems to his pewter grey robe. Volta had been my apprentice, Nero explained. When he sided with the New Order, I took it as personal insult, but then when he died in the fight at the Tony's monastery, I felt I owed him an open mind. I now find joy in gleaning, and surprisingly, it's not a terrible thing. Anastasia respected the venerable scythe too much to put forward her opinion, but Maria was not one to hold her tongue. I know you cared for Volta, Scythe Curie said, but grief is not an excuse for depravity. It left Nero speechless, as it was intended to. They stood eating among like-minded scythes, all of whom lamented the trajectory of the Scythedom. We should never have allowed them to brand themselves the New Order, sighed Mandela said. There's nothing new about what they do, and casting those of us who hold on to the integrity of the founders as old guard diminishes us. We are far more forward-thinking than those who serve their primal appetites. You can say that while eating a pound of shrimp, Nelson, quipped Scythe Twain, which made some of the others chuckle, but Mandela was not amused. The conclave meals were intended to make up for a life of self-denial, Mandela said. But they mean nothing when there are sides who deny themselves nothing. Change is fine as long as it serves the greater good, Scythe Curie said, but the New Order sides don't even serve a lesser good. We must continue to fight the good fight, Marie, said Scythemere. We must maintain and exalt the virtues of the Scythedom, stick to the highest ethical ground. We must always glean with wisdom and compassion, for it is at the core of what we are, and we must never take the ending of life for granted. It is a burden, not a delight. It is a privilege, not a pastime. Well said, agreed Scythe Twain. I must believe virtue will triumph over the selfishness of the New Order. But then he smirked at Scythemere. Of course, Golda. It does sound as if you are campaigning for Highblade. She laughed heartily at that. A job I wouldn't want. But you have heard rumblings, haven't you? Twain asked. She shrugged. Rumblings are just that. I leave gossip to sides who have not yet turned the corner. Me, I'm too old to waste my time with petty speculations. Anastasia turned to Scythe Curie. What rumblings? She asked, but Scythe Curie was blasé about it. Every couple of years, there are rumors that Xenocrates will step down as Highblade, but he never does. I think he starts those rumors himself to make sure he's the center of everyone's conversation. And, as she eavesdropped on several other discussions, Anastasia could see that he had succeeded. What discussions weren't about Scythe the Fair featured all sorts of rumors about Xenocrates. That he had already self-gleaned, that he had fathered a child, that he had a tragic accident while setting his age-bag that left him with the body of a 3-year-old. Speculation was rampant, and nobody seemed to care that some of the rumors were ridiculous. That was part of the fun. Anastasia, in her own scythely arrogance, had thought there would be much more conversation about the attempts on her and Marie's lives, but it was barely most Scythe's brothers. Didn't I hear something about you both going into hiding? Scythe Sequoia asked. Was it about this Scythe of the Fair business? Absolutely not, Anastasia said, far more demandingly than she had intended to. Marie intervened to stop her from digging a deeper hole. It was just a group of unsavories. It behooved us to be nomadic until they were ferreted out. Well, I'm glad it's all resolved, said Scythe Sequoia, and he went back to the buffet for seconds. Resolved? Said Anastasia, incredulous. We still have no idea who's behind it. Yes, said Marie calmly. And whoever it is could be right here in the rotunda. Best to feign nonchalance. Constantine had informed them of his suspicion that the scythe might be behind the attacks, and now he was working that angle. Anastasia looked around the crowded rotunda for him. He was not difficult to spot, as his crimson robe stood out, although mercifully it had no jewels upon it. Constantine was still holding his position of neutrality for whatever it was worth. I'm glad you have your eyes back, Anastasia told him as she approached. They're still a bit sensitive to light, he said. I suppose they must be worked in. Any more leads? No, he told her honestly, but I have a suspicion that fecal matter will be floating to the surface during this conclave. We'll see how badly it stinks of conspiracy. So, how would you rate your first year? Anastasia turned to see another junior scythe in a robe of worn and intentionally frayed name. This was Scythe Morrison. He had been ordained one conclave before she was. He was good looking and tried to negotiate the Scythedom using high school rules, which, amazingly, got him much farther than Anastasia thought it would. The year was eventful, she said, not really wanting to get into it with him. He smiled at her. I'll bet. She tried to slip away, but found herself engulfed by an elegy of junior sights that had seemed to appear out of nowhere. I love the way you give people a month's notice, said one girl, whose name she couldn't remember. I might try that. So, what's it like learning with Scythe Curry? Another young scythe asked. Anastasia tried to be polite and patient, but being the center of their attention felt awkward. She did want to have friends closer to her own age within the Scythedom, but many of the junior scythes bid her to curry favor with her. Careful, Mary had said after Harper's conclave, or you'll find yourself with an entourage. Anastasia had no desire for an entourage, or to associate with the kind of scythes who did. We should go cleaning together, Scythe Morrison suggested with a wink, which just annoyed her. It's the fun. Fun? She asked. So you're going New Order? I go both ways, he said, then did a quick course correction. I'm undecided. Well, when you decide, let me know. And she let that be her parting shot. When Scythe Morrison was first ordained, Anastasia thought it was admirable that he had chosen a female historical figure to name himself after, and asked if she could call him Tony. He had gone on to tell her, with a fair amount of distaste at the idea, that it was Jim Morrison he had named himself after, a songwriter and performer from the mortal age who had overdosed. Scythe recalled some of his music and had told Scythe Morrison that his patron historic got at least one thing right when he wrote, "People are strange," meaning people like Scythe Morrison. Ever since then, he seemed to have made it his personal mission to win her over with his charm. Morrison must hate it that more of us junior scythes want to hang out with you than with him, Scythe Beyoncé said to her a few minutes later, and Anastasia nearly beat her head off. Hang out? Scythes don't hang out. We clean, and we support each other. That set Scythe Beyoncé up, but seemed to put Anastasia on an even higher pedestal. It made her think back to what Scythe Constantine had said before the last attack, that she was as much a target as Marie, because Anastasia was influential among the junior scythes. She didn't want that influence, but she couldn't deny it was there. Perhaps, someday, she'd grow into it and find a way to properly make use of it. At 6:59 a.m., right before the burst doors opened to admit the Mid-American scythes to Conclave, High-Blade Xenocrates arrived, putting to bed the rumors that he had self-cleaned or was a toddler. It's odd for Xenocrates to arrive so late, Mary pondered aloud. Usually he's among the first ones here, and spends as much time as he can talking up the other sides. Maybe he just doesn't want to answer questions about Scythe the Fur, Anastasia suggested. Maybe. For whatever reason, Xenocrates avoided conversation in the few moments that he had. Then the big brass doors swung open, and the sides filed into the semicircular conclave chamber. The opening session of Conclave was typical, moving with the glacial pace of its rituals. First was the tolling of the names, where every single scythe chose 10 of his or her recent cleaning victims to memorialize with the solemn toll of an iron bell. Then came the washing of hands, where the scythes symbolically cleansed themselves of 4 mounds of blood. As an apprentice, Saitra found it pointless, but now, as Scythe Anastasia, she understood the deep emotional and psychological power a communal cleansing could have, when your days were spent taking life. The mid-morning break had everyone back in the rotunda, where the breakfast spread had been replaced by an artful array of cupcakes, all of which were frosted to match the robes of every mid-American scythe. It was one of those things that might have seemed like a good idea at the time, and was impressive to look at, but it all fell apart as scythes crowded the table, trying to locate their particular cupcake, quite often finding that someone else with less patience had already eaten it. While the breakfast conversation had been more about greeting and small talk, the mid-morning discussions were meatier. Scythe Cervantes, who had administered the Vocator challenge during Anastasia's apprenticeship, approached her to discuss the social status she had been trying to avoid. With so many junior scythes being enticed to align with the new order, several of us think it would be a good idea to begin a traditions committee to study the teachings, but more importantly, the intentions of the founding scythes. Anastasia gave her honest appraisal. Sounds like a good idea if you can get enough junior scythes to be a part of it. That's where you would come in, Cervantes said. We'd like to propose it. We think it would go a long way to creating a solid foundation among the younger scythes to oppose the new order. The rest of us would be behind you 100%, said Scythe Angelo, who had joined the conversation. And as you'd be proposing it, it would only make sense that you be the committee chair, Cervantes said. Anastasia had never thought she'd have the opportunity to be on a committee this soon into her scythehood, much less chair one. I'm honored that you would consider me capable of leading a committee. Oh, more than capable, said Scythe Angelo. Maya's right, Cervantes said. You're probably the only one among us who could make such a committee relevant. It was heady to think that such seasoned scythes as Cervantes and Angelo could put so much stock in her. She thought back to the other young scythes who gravitated toward her. Could she effectively turn their energies to honoring the intentions of the founding scythes? She wouldn't know until she tried. Perhaps she needed to stop avoiding the other junior scythes and actually engage them. When they returned to the conclave chamber, Anastasia told Scythe Korea about the idea. She was pleased that her protégé had been tapped for such an important role. It's about time we found a way to give the junior scythes some meaningful direction, she said. Lately, they seem far too listless. Anastasia was prepared to propose the committee later that day, but the table on which the Scython played was effectively overturned just before they broke for lunch. After Scythe Rockwell was disciplined for cleaning too many unsavories, and Scythe Yamaguchi was praised for the artistry of her cleanings, High Blade Xenocrates made an announcement.
This concerns all of you,
He began.
As you know, I've been High Blade of Mid-America since the year of the Lemur.
The room suddenly became very quiet. He took his time, allowing that silence to take root before he spoke again.
While 43 years is a mere drop in the bucket, it is a long time to be doing the same thing day after day.
Anastasia turned to Marie and whispered, Who does he think he's talking to? We all do the same thing day after day. Marie didn't sash her, but didn't respond either.
These are trying times, said the High Blade, and I feel that I can best serve the Scythom in a different capacity.
And then he finally got to the point.
I am pleased to inform you all that I have been chosen to succeed Grand Slayer Hemingway on the World Scythe Council when he self-cleans tomorrow morning.
Now the chamber erupted in chatter, and Xenocrates began banging his gavel to bring order. But after such an announcement, order was slow in coming. Anastasia turned to Scythecore, but Marie stood so stiffly and was so taciturn, Anastasia didn't dare to ask her a question. Instead, she turned to Scythe Farabi on her other side. "So, what happens now?" she asked. "Will he appoint the next High Blade?"
Didn't you study parliamentary procedures of the Scythedom during your apprenticeship?
Scythe Farabi chided.
We will vote upon a new High Blade by the end of the day.
The room smoldered with whispered conversation as sides hurried to position themselves, creating and confirming alliances in the wake of Shinokete's announcement. Then, a voice called out from the far side of the room. "I nominate Honorable Scythe Marie Curie for the position of High Blade of Mid-America." It was a voice that Anastasia recognized right away, although even if she hadn't, Scythe Constantine was hard to miss in his crimson robe as he stood to make his nomination. Anastasia snapped her eyes to Marie, who had shut her eyes tightly, and Anastasia knew this was why she had been so stiff, so silent before. She was steeling herself for this. She knew someone would nominate her. That it was Constantine, however, must have surprised even her.
"I second the nomination,"
shouted another Scythe. It was Morrison, who threw a quick glance in Anastasia's direction, as if being the first to second Scythe Curie's nomination would win her over. Marie opened her eyes and began shaking her head. "I'm going to have to decline," she said, more to herself than to Anastasia. But as she began to stand up to announce it, Anastasia touched her arm ever so gently to stop her, just as Marie had always done for her when she was about to make her own decision. "Don't," said Citra. "Not yet, anyway. Let's see where this goes." Scythe Curie considered it and heaved a sigh. "I can guarantee you it won't go anywhere good." But still, she held her tongue, accepting the nomination. For now. Then, a Scythe in a coral pink robe, studded with tourmaline gemstones, rose and said,
"I nominate Scythe Nietzsche."
"Of course she does," said Scythe Alfarab in disgust. "The New Order never misses an opportunity to grab at power." There were shouts of support and anger that made the walls shake, and all the banging of Xenogetes' cable could do was add rhythm to the rancor. Scythe Nietzsche's nomination was seconded by another jewel-studded Scythe.
Are there any other nominations before we break for lunch?"
shouted the High Blade. And although Scythe Truman, a noted independent, was nominated, it was too late. The battle lines had already been drawn, and his nomination was not even seconded.
"I am fascinated by the concept of ritual, those things that human beings do that serve no practical purpose and yet deliver great comfort and continuity. The Scythedom might berate the Tonis for their practices, but their own rituals are no different. The Scythedom's traditions are steeped in pomp and great ceremony. Take, for instance, the installation of a new Grand Slayer. There are 7 of them on the World Scythe Council, one representing each continent, and once appointed, they are appointed for life. The only way out is to self-clean. But they don't just self-clean. Their entire staff of undersides must voluntarily self-clean with them. If any of the undersides refuse, the Grand Slayer must remain alive and retain his or her position. Not surprisingly, it's very rare for a Grand Slayer to gain consensus enough among his or her underlings to self-clean. All it takes is one defiant individual to prevent it. The affair takes months of preparation, and all in absolute secrecy. The new Grand Slayer must be present because, according to tradition, the diamond amulet must be removed from the dead Grand Slayer and placed around the new one's shoulders while still warm. I have never seen the ritual, of course, but stories abound. The Thunderhead. Chapter 33. High School with Murder. "What were you thinking?" Scythe Curie accosted Constantine in the rotunda as soon as they were let out for lunch. And although he was a tall man, he seemed to shrink beneath the wrath of the Grand Dame of Death. "I was thinking that we now know the reason you were both attacked,"
What are you talking about? But Anastasia caught on even before Maria did. Someone knew. Yes, said Constantine. The choosing of a Grand Slayer is supposed to be secret, but someone knew that Xenocrates would be leaving an opening for the High Blade. Whoever it was wanted to take you out of the running, Marie, and prevent your young protege from brawling you in your size to vote for a candidate who would uphold the old ways. That took a bit of the wind out of Scythe Cru's sails. She had to take a moment to let it sink in. Do you think it's Nietzsche? I don't believe so, said Constantine. He might be New Order, but he's not the type. Most New Order sides bend the laws just shy of breaking them, and Scythe Nietzsche is no different. Then who? Said Constantine had no answer. But by nominating you first, it gives us an advantage. It allows us to see how others react and maybe give themselves away. And if Constantine hadn't nominated you, said Scythe Mandela, coming up beside them, I would have. As would I, said Scythe's twin. So, you see, said Constantine with a satisfied smile, your nomination was a given. I just wanted to make sure it was strategic. But I don't want to be Highblade. I have successfully avoided it all my life. Then she singled out Scythemere, who stood on the fringe of the conversation. Golda, she said, why not you? You always know precisely what to say to motivate people. You'd be a spectacular Highblade. Scythemere put up her hands. Heavens, no, she said. I'm good with words, but not with crowds. Just because my patron Historic was a strong leader, don't mistake me for one. I'd be happy to write your speeches, but that's as far as I'll go. Scythe Curie's face, so stoic most of the time, now betrayed an characteristic anguish. The things I did in my past, the very things that people laud me for, are the very things that should disqualify me from being Highblade. At that, Scythe Constantine laughed. Marie, if we were judged by the things we most regret, no human being would be worthy to sweep the floor. You're the most qualified, and it's time you accepted the fact. The turmoil in the conclave chamber did not damage the side's appetites. If anything, they ate more voraciously. Anastasia wandered Rotundia, trying to take the temperature of the room. The New Order sides were buzzing with schemes and subterfuges, but so was the Old Guard. The day would not end until a new Highblade was chosen, because, if anything, the Scythedom had learned from the abuses of political contests in the Age of Mortality. Best to get an election over as quickly as possible, before everyone became even more bitter and disgusted than they already were. He won't have the votes, everyone was saying of Nietzsche. Even those who support him only do so because he's the best they've got. If Curie wins, said Seth Morrison, whom Anastasia could not seem to avoid, you'll be the one of her undersides. That's a pretty wonderful place to be. Well, I am voting for her, said Scythe Yamaguchi, still glowing from the praise she received early in the day. She'll be a much better Highblade than Xenocrates. I heard that, said Xenocrates, barking into their conversation like a dirigible. Scythe Yamaguchi was mortified, but Xenocrates was jovial. Not to worry, he said. It's not me you need to impress anymore. The man was positively ecstatic to have finally been able to tell the Scythedom of his appointment. So, what do we call you now, Your Excellency? Morrison asked. Ever the Sagap. As a Grand Slayer, I shall now be addressed as Your Exalted Excellency, he said, seeming like a child who just came home with a perfect report card. Perhaps he had been transformed into a child after all. Have you spoken to Scythe Constantine yet? Anastasia asked, and that deflated him slightly. I've been putting space between us, if you must know, he said, speaking to Anastasia as if in confidence, but loud enough for others to hear. I'm sure he wants to discuss the latest information on your old friend Rowan Demisk, but I have no interest in the discussion. He shall be the new High-Blade's concern. The mention of Rowan hit her like a glancing blow, but she shook it off. You should speak to Constantine, she said. It's important. And to make sure that he did, she waved to Constantine, who came right over. Your Excellency, Constantine said, because he was not exalted yet. I need to know who you told about your appointment. Xenoctes was offended by the insinuation.
No one, of course. It is a secret matter when one is chosen to succeed a Grand Slayer.
Yes, but is there anyone whom I have overheard? Xenoctes held his answer for a bit, and that was how they knew there was something he wasn't saying.
No, no one.
Constantine said nothing, just waited for him to come clean.
Of course, the news did come during one of my dinner parties,
he said. The High Blade was known for his dinner parties, always intimate, for no more than 2 or 3 sides. It was an honor to be invited to break bread with the High Blade, and part of his diplomatic strategy was to always invite sides who despised one another, with the hope of creating friendships, or, at the very least, meaningful duties. Sometimes he was successful, sometimes not.
Who was there?
Asked Constantine.
I took the call in another room.
Yes, but who was there?
2 sides,
Xenocrates said.
Twain and Brahms.
Anastasia knew Twain pretty well. He claimed to be independent, but he almost always sided with the old guard when it came to important decisions. Brahms she knew only from conversations with others.
He was ordained in the year of the snail, Scythe Curie had once told her. Fitting, because the man seems to leave a trail of slime wherever he goes.
But she also said that Brahms was harmless, a lackluster, lazy Scythe who did his job and little more. Could such a man be the mastermind of the plot against them? Before lunch ended, Anastasia approached Scythe Brahms as he perused the dessert table to see if she could figure out where his allegiances lay.
I don't know about you, she said, but I've never seemed to have room for dessert at conclave lunches.
The trick is to eat slowly, he said.
Pays for the pudding, my mother used to say.
Then, when he took a piece of pie from the buffet table, Anastasia could clearly see that his hands were shaking.
You should get that checked, she told him. Your nanites might need adjusting.
It's just excitement, he said.
It's not every day we choose a new High Blade.
Can Scythe Curie count on your vote? He chuckled at that.
Well, I'm certainly not voting for Nietzsche.
Then he excused himself and disappeared into the crowd with his slice of apple pie. The weapon salesmen were told that there would be no time to pitch their wares at this conclave, and were sent packing. The afternoon belonged to Scythes, Nietzsche, and Curie, as each would try to convince the Scythedom to cast votes for them.
I know you don't want this, Anastasia said to Marie, but you have to act like you do.
Scythe Curie looked at her, a bit bemused.
Are you presuming to instruct me on how to present myself to the Scythedom?
No, said Anastasia, but then thought back to how Scythe Morrison approached the Scythedom.
Actually, yes, this whole thing seems like a high school popularity contest, and I'm much closer to that than you are.
Scythe Curie gave a rueful guffaw.
You've hit the nail on the head, Anastasia. That's exactly what the Scythedom is. High school with murder.
The High Blade, as one of his last acts as such, called the afternoon session to order. The 2 nominees would each deliver an impromptu oration, followed by a debate moderated by the parliamentarian, who sat to the High Blade's right. Then, after a session of questions, the Scythedom clerk, to the High Blade's left, would tally the votes in a secret ballot. The 2 nominees would use a highly modern and technologically sophisticated method to decide who went first, the flip of a coin. Unfortunately, since physical money was no longer a common thing in the world, one of the apprentices was sent up to the Scythedom offices to find one. Then, as they waited for the coin, things took an extremely surreal turn.
"Excuse me, Your Excellency,"
said a shaky voice, and then again a little bit firmer.
"Your Excellency, excuse me."
It was Scythe Brahms, and something seemed different about him, but Anastasia couldn't make out what it was.
"The conclave recognizes Honorable Scythe Brahms," said Xenocrates, "but whatever you have to say, please make it quick, so we can get on with this." "I have another nomination." "I'm sorry, Brahms, but you can nominate yourself. Someone else has to do it."
A few sides laughed derisively.
"It's not myself that I'm nominating, Your Excellency,"
He cleared his throat, and that was the moment that Anastasia realized what was different about him. He had changed his robe. It was still a peach velvet robe with light blue trim, but this one had opals embedded in it, glistening like stars.
I wish to nominate Honorable Scythe Robert Goddard for High Blade of Mid-America.
Silence for a moment, then a few more chuckles, but they weren't derisive. They were nervous.
Rams,
said Xenocrates slowly.
in case you've forgotten, Scythe Goddard has been dead for over a year now.
And then the heavy bronze doors of the conclave chamber slowly began to open.
I understand pain, perhaps not physical pain, but the pain of knowing something terrible is on the horizon, yet being unable to prevent it. With all my intellect, with all the power vested in me by humankind, there are some things I am completely powerless to change. I cannot act on anything I am told in confidence. I cannot act on anything my cameras see in private places, and above all, I cannot act on anything that even remotely relates to the Scython. The best I can ever do is hint at what must be done in the vaguest of ways, and leave action in the hands of citizens. And even then, there's no guarantee that of the millions of actions they could possibly take, they will choose the right ones to avert disaster. And the pain of my awareness is unbearable, because my eyes do not close ever, and so all I can do is watch unblinkingly as my beloved humankind slowly whips the rope it will use to hang itself.
The Thunderhead.